So welcome everyone. We come to our fifth session of following the children of Israel as they travel from Sinai to the Promised Land. And some weeks ago, they began with trumpets sounding and with a lot of goodwill, but it wasn't long before the complaints started to happen. And we've gone to really very interesting conversation about the manna and what the manna was symbolizing. It was symbolizing the God training them to eat, to be more spiritual, right? They were wanting meat, which they said, we desire meat. And we talked about how that was their desire for more physical things. And God was trying to make them more spiritual and all the problems that was causing. Then we talked about Moses, last time, who was crying out to God, why did I conceive these people? And we talked about God giving him the solution of transferring some of his power to the elders. And we talked about what was that like? Was that lessening Moses's power, or was it like a candle where his flame was still as bright? And today we're continuing, and it's again, this passage that we're studying is considered by the scholars to be an interesting bringing together several stories at the same time. The scholars believe that different stories are amalgamated into one story, but we're going between the quail and eventually in the story of the elders who received the divine spirit. And then if we have time, and I really hope we will, we're going to get to the really interesting part where Aaron and Miriam speak poorly about their brother Moses, and God summons them, says, you two come to the tent right now, and let me tell you how it really is. Welcome, Suzanne. Is this your first time joining this class?
Now as a regular. Before I would be able to, if I could steal time away from my work, but Thursdays and Fridays are my own now, and so I hope to be a regular.
I thought you retired, Suzanne, when I saw you.
Semi-retired, 3 days a week.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
So I am pulling up the passage, and as always, we will be led by Alan in the reading. We can go back to where we stopped. Here we go. Okay. Share screen. This is after Moses, after God reassures Moses, I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to help I'm going to share the Spirit. And this is when God actually does that. So please go ahead, Alan.
Then, after coming down in a cloud and speaking to him, Adonai drew upon the Spirit that was on him and put it upon the 70 participating elders. And when the Spirit rested upon them, they spoke in ecstasy, but did not continue. Two of the participants, one named Eldad and the other Medad, had remained in camp, yet the Spirit rested upon them. They were among those recorded, but they had not gone out to the tent, and they spoke in ecstasy in the camp. An assistant ran out and told Moses, saying, Eldad and Medad are acting the prophet in the camp. And Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' attendant from his youth, spoke up and said, my lord Moses, restrain them. But Moses said to him, are you wrought up on my account? Would that all Adonai's people were prophets, that Adonai put the divine spirit upon them. Moses then re-entered the camp together with the elders of Israel.
Thank you. Very interesting, right? This whole passage. So how did these two get the Spirit? Do you think it just was coming down and they were close enough that somehow they receive some of it, or?
But did it matter where they were to receive it? I mean, it's coming from Adonai.
Yeah.
He could bestow it anywhere.
So were they part of the chosen 70?
So that's a really good question. Let's get to the commentators, because that's the angle we're going to take to look at this. But there's a lot of interesting underneath here about how spirit works. We've been talking about for the last few weeks. But let's get into it.
Before or if we're going to cover this, you can say we're going to cover it. But is this like when you hear Christians talk about
catching the Holy Ghost?
Talking in tongues?
Yeah.
Or catching the Holy Ghost?
Well, there's several episodes in the Tanakh where this happens, right? I don't know if you remember, Alan, from our studies in Samuel, when King Saul, before he's king, and he's walking, the prophet Samuel finds Saul, he's just a guy, and then he goes and walks with the prophets, and he sees prophets who are in ecstasy, and suddenly he catches it too, and then Saul starts to speak, and then later there's a moment where Saul is pursuing David, and 3 messengers come up to try and catch David, and the first 3 times the messengers, each time they come close, spirit grips them and they start to lose their sense of mission. And then Saul himself goes, and then he also catches the spirit, and he ends up taking off his clothes and spending all night in some kind of altered state. So that happens. I don't know. I don't know if anybody knows, but I thought that the speaking in tongues was referring to the Pentecost part in the Christian Bible. Is that right?
That's what I got out of it. I mean, it sounds like these 2 caught the Holy Ghost. I mean, what Black people would say is in a Pentecostal situation is catching the Holy Ghost, right?
Or they found some inspiration. Now, inspiration is a nice word, because to inspire means to draw into yourself. So you're talking about the Ruach, the Spirit of God, or the breath of God. I mean, it's the same sort of notion. Now, it might be location specific. Okay, we got to get a physicist here to tell us if the Ruach Elohim is location specific, and in fact, whether it decreases from a specific location according to which would be usual, according to the square of the distance between the people. So we could have a real scientific view of this thing, but I don't think we can do that actually.
We don't have enough information, but this is a really long-standing debate. I mean, within the Torah itself, right? People think you have the view of the God in Deuteronomy that's far away and distant and ultimate. Then you have the Levitical view of God. The God is coming into the tangible, and therefore there must be some kind of physical manifestation. It has to be measured. If it's coming into the physical, it must be able to be measured in some way. So, if by entering into the tent of meeting you get zapped, so what point do you get zapped? You get zapped when your full foot is in, or do you get zapped? You get zapped only when you touch it, and does it depend on your vessel and how much you're able to take as a person? Maybe if you've done spiritual training, you're able to take some of that electricity and not get zapped by it.
I look at it this way: if Adonai could make manna fall from heaven, and he can make spirit extend everywhere.
That's true.
That's how I
That's what
feel.
Bonnie feels.
Yeah.
But I have a question though. I'm confused. So these 2 were not on the mountain. They were not summoned on top to the mountaintop with the others.
They weren't part of the original.
They were not part of the original, but they were leaders of the tribes, right? So they should have been on the mountain, or they were excluded from the mountain. I mean, it sounds like they should have been there, and God found them anywhere and inspired them with spirit, is what it looks like. But
It's very Interesting, right? Because it almost sounds from at least the way this translation in the Hebrew does convey it, that it was almost like an accident, right? It almost sounds that way, that they weren't there, but they somehow were resonating, and somehow, they weren't part of the group, and they're the ones who are prophesying outside the camp. So let's go back first and reread that a little bit closer, and then we'll start looking at the commentaries and get to it. So two of the participants, Vayisharu Shnei Anashim B'Machaneh, two of the participants remained in the camp. One was Eldad and one was Medad.
What does that mean?
And then the spirits rested upon them. And they were among those that were recorded. But they had not gone out of the camp, and they were in prophesying, and they were in ecstasy in the camp. This is the verb that's used also with Saul, when Saul catches the spirit. Right, spirit is it's like you were saying, when you catch the spirit, and then go ahead, Judy.
That makes me think that they were part of the 70. That says somehow they hadn't made it up there.
Okay, well, let's see what I know it's really
God intended
Because
them.
then
to be
it's
part of
like,
70.
Adonai knew they were supposed to be there, so that's why they caught the spirit, but it's somewhat unclear.
But it does sound intentional, right? That even though
Yeah.
they're not part of the group on the mountain, God intended them to catch the
Yes.
spirit, no matter
I
where
agree.
they were.
I have a
Yeah,
question.
that's the way I took it.
I
Go
have a
ahead.
question. I have a
Yeah.
question, just real quickly. It says the Ruach, but it doesn't say Ruach Elohim. So I guess my question is, I guess I'm always have some doubt. It's like the fact that it doesn't say Ruach Elohim, does it leave it open for what kind of spirit is working there, and is it beneficial to the community or not? Just a question.
Right.
So the question is about, what kind of spirit is it? And we obviously have a sense of different kinds of spirit, right? The spirit of God maybe is more focused, while just spirit could be maybe something that's contagious or coming around, but that God is not totally behind. I don't know. Let's maybe go ahead. Somebody was about to say something, and then we can go into the commentaries and see if we have a little bit more of a answer there. Okay. Morris, do you mind reading for us Or Chaim, a Moroccan, quite spiritually minded commentator? Is Morris here?
No,
No.
I'm here.
He's always here, so I just expected him to be there. Sorry. Norma, how about you?
Okay. He took from the spirit, etc. The word Atzel, that may have been intended as a clue to the source of this prophetic spirit. The
world
Atzilut,
Atzilut,
okay.
world of emanation.
Remained very close to the throne of God from the spirit which was upon him. This may describe the quality of that spirit. The source of the spirit which was bestowed on the elders emanated not from Moses, but from higher regions. Alternatively, it may mean that after the spirit which imbued Moses was given to the elders, Moses' own spirit remained fully intact. Bamidbar Rabbah 15 states that when Moses evaluated the level of prophecy the elders attained, it turned out that the two elders, Eldad and Medad, numbers 71 and 72 respectively, had received a higher degree of prophetic spirit because their portion came from God directly, whereas the other 70 elders received their prophetic spirit only from Moses. This is why the 70 elders prophesied only briefly. Well, that explains it.
Interesting solution.
Like theirs wasn't watered down in any way.
Yours came directly from
From Adonai.
the highest. In Kabbalah,
Yeah.
Olam HaAtzilut is the highest of the four worlds of DRE. So let's go on a little bit. Keep looking. I think. Let's see.
want to do Ibn Ezra, but they did say no more. Hebrew,
Actually, go ahead.
okay, but they did so no more. Hebrew, velo yasaf, a second time. The literal meaning of lo yasfu is that they did not add. Hence, points out that this term is an idiom meaning they did not repeat it. The same applies to the phrase ve lo yasaf, and it went on no more, and with a great voice, and it went on no more. It did not repeat itself, Deuteronomy 5:19. And ve lo yasaf, no more, now more. In and he knew her again no more. Its meaning is he knew her not a second time. According to the rules of Hebrew grammar, the word yasaf is not related to the word tisafu, swept away.
We don't have to read the whole thing. It's the whole point of grammar.
Okay, all right.
What he's getting to is that part where the 70 elders, they prophesy, but then they stop prophesying. So he was getting to that word, which isn't, and they stop. They didn't add to it. But actually, I want to get to Rabbeinu Bachya, he's got something more interesting. So please go ahead, Norma.
Rabbeinu Bachya. God descended in a cloud and spoke to him, and he increased some of the spirit that was upon him and gave it to the 70 men, the elders. Rabbi Avraham Ibn Ezra writes that Moses took 6 men from each tribe, a total of 72. Since God had told him to take 70 men, 2 of them were left out. This is correct. Thus far, the wording of Ibn Ezra. According Tanhuma, I think these words are so hard, Bahakloka 12, Moses took 72 pieces of paper. On 70 of them, he wrote the elder, whereas 2 pieces of paper he left blank. Each man drawing a slip of paper with the word elder knew he had been appointed. The 2 men who would draw blanks would have to conclude that they had not been found worthy. Seeing Eldad and Medad were aware of this and were very humble. They remained in the camp without either returning to their private tents nor assembling around the tabernacle before the drawing of these slips of paper to ensure that none of the participants would be embarrassed by drawing a blank. Seeing now Moses only had to prepare 70 such slips. They knew if they had participated, they would have been chosen as the Torah had testified. They had been among the recorded ones. Seeing that they were so modest and humble, they were rewarded with the measure of Holy Spirit. Concerning this, the Torah wrote, verse 26, they did not go to the tent, but prophesied in the camp, the general encampment of the Israelites. The ability to prophecy is an area of a lesser degree of sanctity than the proximity of the tabernacle was remarkable. There is an explicit verse in Isaiah 61:1 indicating that the virtue of modesty and humility leads to its owner being imbued with prophetic spirit. The prophet writes, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me because the Lord has anointed me. He has sent me as a herald of joy to the humble. The merit of their humility resulted in these 2 people, Eldad and Medad, enjoying a higher degree of Holy Spirit than the 70 elders. Well, that explains it. They changed the spelling of Medad also.
Yeah, they're more Ashkenazic or more.
Yeah. But that really explains how the 2 of them, why they weren't there.
It's a really interesting solution to the whole thing.
Yeah.
So it's reading, as we say, it's reading between the lines a little bit, right? It's it's obviously it's a lot of midrash there. I don't know how completely satisfying, I'm not sure if that's the simple meaning, but what they're saying is that they were, they knew this whole thing. It was 72, but Moses thought 70, so 2 people were going to be excluded. They were so humble, they thought, we'll just exclude ourselves. And because they were so humble and stayed out of the camp, they were given extra.
I mean, if you don't have this explanation, though, we could go on for days talking about.
You go on for days trying to understand it.
You know, it's interesting, the envy of the other people who saw when they prophesied. So the general riffraff there who didn't have the Spirit, look at these people who are prophesying, and they're upset by this. And then Moses has to reassure them. Now, that's an interesting notion. So Moses, it seemed to me that Moses then has enough of the Ruach that he wouldn't feel any envy. Okay, or Moses is not capable of feeling envy, but the people who did not have any of this felt some envy.
They felt clearly they were unhappy about someone other than Moses displaying. Everybody knew Moses was the prophet, but to suddenly see their friend become a prophet, that maybe that provoked envy or made them upset. I mean, Joshua, right? Joshua, who's eventually going to go ahead.
No, Joshua gets upset. I mean, he runs for Moses and he says, look, they're
Stop them.
clearly the two that are prophesying in camp are unexpected and have set Joshua off also.
Yeah, it's and Moses's answer is so classic, right? He's saying, well, I wish everybody was prophesying, everybody would get it. And so to me, at least, that remark of Moses makes me think almost that, God's radiation came onto the camp, maybe to a greater degree on the 70, but then also in the other parts. And only those who were worthy and ready could feel it. And maybe Eldad and Medad were worthy, or were prepared, or were in tune, resonating with it, and they were able to.
The next explanation doesn't make him sound so humble and good.
Yeah. Well, so I didn't want to spend too much time on the whole Moses part of him, his comment. The commentators weren't actually that interesting on it, but what I want to bring was Sforno here, the Italian commentator, on what Joshua says. So let's just quickly go back and see what Joshua says. So the assistants ran out and told Moses, Eldad and Medad are acting the prophet in the camp, which makes you, right, that's very visual in your mind. You're thinking, what were they doing? What were they saying? What were they? So Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' attendant, spoke up and said, stop, stop them. So we're thinking, why did Joshua say this? One reason was because we think that Joshua was, either he was envious, or maybe he was upset, felt out of control, right? Something out of control is happening. Imagine you're in services and somebody suddenly starts to do this. Maybe some people would say, Rabbi, stop them.
But if this was the first example that the children of Israel had ever seen of this kind of spiritual or emotional display in the Spirit of God, I can see where they might have freaked out. I can see where where Joshua might have been upset almost. What's going on? What's happening? Moses, stop it. Moses, take control. Moses, do something, right? But all along this journey through Sinai, what we're seeing is it is the first time that they are encountering a lot of this stuff, right? When they were slaves, they thought like slaves. When they were in Egypt, they thought only about what was going on in Egypt. But now that they are literally in the wilderness, they're having to broaden their perspectives. They're having to grow, right? They're having to respond to challenges, things they've never seen before, in order to grow into the people that they are destined to become. That's how I'm seeing it.
Very nice. So, and it's very interesting because the lesson is different in different times, right? When Korach comes and Korach says, aren't we all holy? Moses says, let's see who's really holy. And God opens up the earth and Korach gets swallowed up. But here Joshua seems to have a similar complaint, like, hey, they think they're so holy. Look at them. They're prophesying. And Moses doesn't say, I'm going to challenge them. He says, if only everybody was like this, if only everybody was doing this.
Well, may I say, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I wanted to bring that up as a contrasting example on a somewhat different basis. There, the question was who's holy and therefore can perform a priestly function, and that seems different from the prophesying. So you already have this tension, at least that seems to me, the priest and the prophet, and our translation here somewhat blunts it by sometimes using the phrase they are ecstatic or in ecstasy. And I realize that there are different forms of the verb. I don't want to get into that, and I don't understand it very well. But the idea is that these are different functions in a way that people recognize them differently. Yeah. And here, he never said to Korah, "Oh boy, if everybody was holy the way you're holy, we could all work things out and share it." So I think there's a tension, or at least a difference, between those two functions of relation to the divine.
That's a good point, Phil. I'm sorry, Judy.
No, go ahead.
Phil, you bring up a good point, because all throughout Tanakh, there is this tension, especially after the exile, right? There's this tension between who is going to lead us. Is it going to be the priests, or is it going to be the prophets? And there's this struggle, right? The prophets are trying to bring down the kings, but after the remnants come back from exile, it's the priests that are leading them, right? It's not the prophets, it's the priests, it's the Levite priests. So thank you for pointing out that tension, because it starts here. It starts in Sinai.
Well, the priests have a function, and they have a social role. The prophets are just by themselves, right? They're people who God touches, and then they speak God's words to the people. I mean, they have a role, but it's not hereditary. It's not organized. The priest is very organized. And it is true in the episode of Korach, Moses says to Korach, what did Aaron do to you? Why are you challenging Aaron? Moses isn't the priest. Moses is the leader. Aaron is really the high priest.
Right.
And
not a priest, but he's a Levite.
Yeah, but Korach was challenging Moses and Aaron. Mm-hmm. Here, it's just they're prophesying, but they're not trying to become the leaders. They're trying to add to the spirituality and do their part. It seems to me a very different kind of thing.
And we're not sure if they're really intending to do this or not. It almost seems like it just happened to them,
Yes.
It was they caught the Holy Spirit, and something's happening. Let's quickly go to Sforno. Sforno is, some of the other commentators. Bachya is more spiritual and mystical, as is Ramban. Sforno tends to be a little bit more pshat, a little bit more simple. And so he says, he, i.e. Joshua, thought that the reason why these two men had not come to the tent of meeting was because they wanted to demonstrate that they could prophesy without being within the spiritual sphere and physical presence of Moses. Which in my mind is just saying he thought they were rebels, right? And I think that's what I'm getting from Joshua between the lines. He thinks these two are rebelling. They're trying to show, look at us, we're like Moses. And Moses doesn't see it that way. He doesn't see their rebellion. He just sees something nice. They're connecting to God, which is where he wishes everybody was connecting to God, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
He wishes everybody was praying ecstatically.
Is there any significance to the way Joshua addresses him? Does he call him Adoni? Does he call him my Lord Moses elsewhere? I don't see a lot of honorifics in the texts, and I wondered if that's something that he does, or if that's making a different kind of point.
Joshua, this might be one of the only lines that Joshua has, except for the episode of the spies. The other times we find Joshua mean, we can go check it out. It is interesting to do it. Let's see, we can do this. Why not? Okay. Can you all see me changing the screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So we see, let's see, is it 32? So this is the episode of the golden calf. This might be one of the first times we find Joshua. So Moses is up the mountain. The people are building the golden calf. And suddenly God says, wait a second, something's happening down there. Let's see. See, and right. Oh man, why isn't Joshua coming up? It must be going too fast. Anyway, Joshua is halfway up the mountain with him. He's not with the people building the camp. Let's see. Oh, here we go. Okay. So this is chapter 32 of Exodus, right? Moses is going down with the tablets to see what did the people do. God told him the people did something horrible, but he doesn't know yet what. So he's coming down, and Joshua is halfway up the mountain. So Joshua also can hear the people. You can imagine there's Mount Sinai. Joshua is halfway up. Moses is all the way up. Moses comes halfway down. And then when Joshua heard the sound of the people and its boisterousness, he said to Moses, there is a cry of war in the camp, right? This is almost a similar kind of thing to what he says here, right? Joshua is somewhere between the people and Moses, and he's trying to help Moses. He tells Moses, there's something going on. But then Moses says, it is not the sound of the tune of triumph or the sound of the tune of defeat. It is the sound of song that I hear. And then Moses goes down. As soon as Moses came near the camp and saw the calf and the dancing, he became enraged and he hurled the tablets from his hands and shattered them at the foot of the mountain. And then we know what happens afterwards. He gets very mad at the people. And Aaron tries to explain what happened. So there's Joshua again, who's halfway up the mountain, right? That's what happened here. And then we find, go ahead. Someone's about to say something. This is at the end of this whole passage. There's another little bit about Joshua that I'm looking for. I think it's here. If not, it's in our little bit. There's a whole thing about that Joshua would go into the tent of meeting sometimes with Moses and Aaron. But so Joshua speaks, but that episode is a little bit similar to now, isn't it? Right? Joshua hears something happening and tries to tell Moses, oh, this is what's happening, but he doesn't quite get it. Let's see. I think it may be the very end of Exodus. Okay. Let's see. No. Okay, so it is at the end of our parsha. We'll see more about Joshua. So we don't find Joshua is a very intriguing character because he comes in not too many places. But then obviously he takes the leadership from Moses. So it's really interesting to see his development throughout all of these stories. Okay. Right, isn't it similar to what he was, to me it feels similar when Joshua says, you know, Moses, I hear the sound of war coming from the camp. And here he says, my Lord Moses, restrain them. Phil, what do you think?
I'm just listening. I'm not sure. I think it's very interesting. There seems so many things going on. I don't have anything worth saying, I'm afraid.
Okay. Well, he doesn't use the word Lord Moses there, but
Right.
His voice seems quite consistent to me.
Yes, it does.
It seems like in both instances, Joshua is trying to protect the political Moses,
Mhm.
not the spiritual leader, not the religious leader, but the political leader.
He's responding to a situation that he interprets and wants to protect. I mean, he's an attendant. We could ask we could wonder what that even means, right? What does it mean to be an attendant? To Moses, does he bring Moses food, or is it more than that? Joshua is the one who leads the people in war against Amalek, right?
Mhm. And Joshua the spy.
Then the spies is later. But here he seems kind of young, right? When you call he's a young attendant, it doesn't seem like he's the general who's fighting off Amalek. It's curious.
But it seems that he's the person that is near to Moses and talks to him. It doesn't seem like a servant role. It's more of an assistant role.
Right.
Even here.
Protege. He's a protege. of
That's a
Moses.
good word. Yeah.
But also to
certainly
hear,
they talk to each other.
he's actually giving Moses basically like a command to restrain them. I think before when he was calling calling out an alarm, but I didn't sense that he was like, okay, you need to do this, Moses. It's almost like a senior advisor to a head politician. It's like, you need to do this now. So I don't know if there's a development in his role or sense of confidence that now he's actually telling Moses like what he should be doing.
Well, that's why my Lord goes first, right?
Just in case.
Yeah.
Just in case.
Exactly. It softens it, right? It softens.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Wow.
Very interesting.
Hmm.
So let's see. We have time, so we're gonna go forward. We can look at this last line, but then we're gonna go back to the quail. But Moses said to him, "Are you wrought up on my account? With the all God's people were prophets, that God put the divine spirit upon them." Very interesting to hear when Moses is very democratic about this, right? All of God's people, right? There's something, his statement is very universal, very democratic. And it's very interesting the way he addresses Joshua. Are you wrought up on my account? Seems to be an intimacy in their connection, right? He's speaking very openly and transparently with Joshua. He's teaching him something, right? This is a big teaching moment for Joshua. But it is interesting that the words, right, we talk about in Tanakh, and I think one of the people who really got into this concept was Nechama Leibowitz. The idea of reoccurring words, right? Words that in different sections of the Tanakh come up again and again, and they kind of give you a sense of the theme of different passages. And especially with Parshiot is where and in this Parsha, the word Ruach comes up so often. We have this episode, and probably not this time, but next time we'll get to the episode where God compares the prophecy of Moses and Aaron of Moses to Aaron and Miriam. And there's a lot about Ruach in this episode, a lot about spirit and what is the nature of spirit and what is spirit about and how we should relate to spirit. And there's even then the spirit, right? I think this is what it's going to say. And here we go. Speaking of spirit, the word for wind in Hebrew, right? A wind from Adonai started up and brought the quail is also ruach. So would somebody read for us? Judy, do you mind reading for us? Moses then.
Sure. A wind from Adonai started up, swept quail from the sea, and stewed them over the camp, about a day's journey. Let me try this again. A wind from Adonai started up, swept quail from the sea and strewed them over the camp, about a day's journey on this side and about a day's journey on that side, all around the camp, and some 2 cubits deep on the ground. The people set to gathering quail all that day and night and all the next day. Even the one who gathered least had 10 homers, and they spread them out all around the camp. The meat was still between their teeth, not yet chewed, when the anger of Adonai blazed forth against the people, and Adonai struck the people with a very severe plague. That place was named Kilbroth Hatava, because the people who had the craving were buried there.
Buried.
Buried. Buried there. Then the people set out from Kilbroth Hatava for Hazeroth, when they were in Hazeroth.
There's another chapter. That's another episode.
Okay.
Another episode.
So the ruach, the wind from Adonai, right? Here again is a different kind of ruach. This is a more physical ruach, but again, a manifestation from God came and brought the quail. What do we do with these two stories being so enmeshed within each other?
Well, maybe they're trying to contrast the quail, the eating of the quail with the prophecy being sort of a higher thing, and the eating of the quail, the physical eating of the thing, being a lower thing. I mean, and the fact that they come right after each other gives the whole thing some sort of sense. Now, the fact that God is a little upset with this, more than a little upset, apparently he kills these people. So, I've often wondered why so much violence, so much corrective violence in these passages. And I think it has something to do with the way that people were treated in Egypt. They were whipped a lot. They were beaten a lot. So if you wanted to teach them something, you would have to do something quite extreme to get their attention. If you just told them something, it wouldn't work that well. So you have to do a little bit of killing and serious punishing, I think.
Just the right amount.
Yeah. I mean, it seems strange that just because they had the quail, but the way they described, they had the quail in their teeth. And this comes right after the Ruach Elohim gets into somebody and creates prophecy. So there seems to be an intense contrast between those two.
Definitely an intense contrast about what God desires, right? God does not desire them to indulge their craving, especially after, I guess, they've been warned, but they still go for it. It's a big journey for them to get to the place where Moses is right. The line before, if only all the people were prophesying. So that's Moses's hope for them, and then we see what all the people are actually doing, which is the opposite of prophesying, right? They're first of all not even talking about the meat part, but the hoarding, right? The manna was all about living in the moment and gathering enough for that day, and they're just hoarding as much as they can.
Well, it's possible that the Ruach Elohim acts in different ways on different people. That in some people, it there's two kinds of hungers. There's a spiritual hunger, and in fact, that word is often used all over the place. For example, in Maimonides, talks about spiritual hunger, uses eating as a metaphor for taking in spiritual sustenance. And there's a physical hunger. And those two things are related to each other. They're both experienced concretely as a kind of hunger. One of them a hunger for food, and the other a hunger for the Ruach Elohim. And maybe that's a clue to us as to, now look at the other thing too. People used to starve themselves. They used to go on radical diets. In fact, to create prophecy, they would starve themselves for a while, and they would get very, very hungry. And through that hunger, they would then somehow get involved with the Ruach Elohim rather than the hunger for food. So there's some relationship between physical hunger and hunger at a higher level.
Very nice. It's so interesting that both of them are before their faces at the same time almost, right? It seems it's like you were to the whip, right? Either go left into the prophecy or go right to the quail. When you go right to the quail, they get whipped, and it's like a mouse through a labyrinth. So they know next time which way is the better direction to go in. It's a very, very, very stark lesson. Still, it's hard not to feel the harshness of this very great plague, right? And that people are dying from. I mean, the imagery of the meat between their teeth is so so visual, right?
Yeah.
Yes, yes, it is. And if you go from David's point about finding a spiritual and a material, fleshly, a parallel track, it's so striking that when it says the meat was between their teeth, amazing phrase, and then it says terem yikaret. So if you take that as cutting the food with your teeth, chewing it, and just before they even chewed it, so they didn't even have the pleasure at that point, at least, of on the most physical side of the thing. The satisfaction or pleasure that comes from chewing up the meat and swallowing it was cut off right then. I find it so vivid. So you can still find the spiritual, if you like, in there, but it's so keen to be a narrative of this ferocious, one must say.
Super interesting, right? The people who are prophesying are told, go ahead, continue for the prophecy, right? Continue going. It's great. It's great that you're prophesying, but the people are eating meat are cut halfway through and given a severe punishment. The other prophets, or if only everybody was prophesying, but here they still got the meat. They haven't even chewed and enjoyed it when they're taught their lesson about it. So it's interesting, speaking of these words that keep coming back, and in these episodes, what makes these episodes really vivid is there's a lot of sudden things that are happening, right? A lot of the time, and it's not sudden events, right? They're just traveling, but this is a lot of action, right? Suddenly they're prophesying. Suddenly there's people who are receiving prophecy who shouldn't be. There's a lot of action and movement, which I think goes back to that whole side of they're at the beginning of their travels and they're learning a lot and there's a lot going on. Later in their travels, we don't get into the detail. This is the most detailed few chapters of their travels in the whole Torah, right? The other parts are summaries. The other parts are less, but these are a series of events and of actions. I mean, you could say that these few chapters really bring to life the whole book of Numbers, right? This is all happening here, one after the other. And so this word terem, right, is right when, and then we're going to have in the episode of Miriam and Aaron, the word pitom, suddenly, come up a few times. So it's a sense of suddenly things are happening, which are unexpected. And there's a lot of uncontrolled events, which don't always go well, but out of all of it, people are learning some lessons.
Yeah. They have their meat, but they cannot eat it.
I've got two, I don't know, clarification questions or whatever. Does it strike anybody as odd that we had this, that God swept all these quail from the sea? I mean, quail, I could see fish from the sea or, seabirds from the sea, but and that, I just keep thinking about that one. But I guess if it's a miracle, then, God's going to get or do what he wants. But were the people who were struck by the plague, was that all of the Israelites? Was it just those who, ate the meat? I'm assuming that not everybody did. Was there any commentary on that? Was it just uniformly across the camp?
That plague, if I looked it up, is a plague on domestic animals. It didn't say it was a murrain, didn't say it was a plague on people.
So it's all, you're all responding to the problem in the text, which is we don't know anything about this very great plague. And usually when you think he's going to give a great plague, we have more details. It's not the only time there are plagues, and usually there's more detail, but here there's not a lot of detail.
Nothing, yeah.
So the commentators are trying to figure it out.
If you Google Bible, that word, it says that it's a domestic animal plague.
Yeah, well, this is what the commentators will say. I just want to quickly address the first question. I saw it. Here we go. Ibn Ezra, you can always trust to give to answer those pshat questions. So scripture reads, because the quail on the shore of the sea were as numerous as the grains of the sand, thus God cut off some of the quail from them. God cut off a portion of the quail that were at the seashore and sent them to the camp of the Israelites. So I guess he's interpreting it as seashore and not the sea, i.e., so sometimes birds gather around the shore to eat and to. So that's what how Ibn Ezra is interpreting it. Again, what's really interesting to think about is everybody's talking about their experiences, right? So Ibn Ezra, he might have gone to a seashore in Spain where he saw a lot of birds gathered, and then for that, I think this is why the quail. But I have actually read scientific interpretations of the Torah where I think they say that there are a lot of quail that sometimes fly around that part of Sinai, or around the Sinai desert in general, in big flocks. Maybe a little wind could push a whole bunch of quail.
Are they kosher?
Yes, of course they're
Quail.
kosher. You kill them kosher.
So all of the quail, right? And there's a whole thing about that they kill them kosher, that they do shechita properly or not. But that area is all an area where birds fly, right? And when you go to the Chulda Valley in Israel, there's a lot of birds there because the birds are flying down from Asia and Europe towards Africa. So it's a whole passageway through Israel and then Egypt. Sinai is where birds fly.
Did we stop there, Rabbi Glick, on the trip and see all those birds?
We did, and there was a movie. Do you remember that there was a movie and there was a funny movie with smoke that came out of special effects and the chairs are moving and it was, yeah, it's funny.
They are native.
Yeah.
They are native to the area. I'm looking it up now.
And then the other question, what is this very great plague? So it is Ibn Ezra who says this plague of murrain. And so if he associates it, he says it's a very great plague. So he links it to a plague, pestilence, the plague in Egypt. So they got hit with the same plague that the Egyptians got hit with in Egypt, which I think is a very interesting idea. This is what Rabbeinu Bachya says. Let's read this as our last comment today. Suzanne, do you mind reading for us, Rabbeinu Bachya?
Okay. A very great blow. It was pestilence. We must ask why Moses did not pray to God to stop the plague, as he had done at Tavera, when God had sent fire. Perhaps he was ashamed, seeing the sin was so great and the people's faith so small, their guilt being their ingratitude. They had kept piling guilt upon guilt ever since they had moved into the desert and had tried to induce physical desires in themselves. They had failed to learn the lesson from what had happened at Tavera, which where many of them had been burned to death. Moses was also ashamed, so that he had been provoked into saying to God, "Why have you done evil with your servant?" He was afraid that if he started to pray, he would give the attribute of justice an opening against the people, seeing he had already noticed that God had become very angry.
So since the God doesn't offer us more detail, we can go to more Ibn Ezra for that. But right, this is a very big plague, and God, and Moses and God are just fed up at this point, right? Tavera happens at the beginning of the chapter, or the chapter before, right? When they first set out, there's something that happens. They complain bitterly, and the fire breaks out, and Moses prays. Here, there's just this great plague. Maybe we'll end quickly by going to Ibn Ezra on the plague. See if he has a little bit more detail to answer. Here we go. Plague of Moraine. So yeah, he doesn't say anymore. Let's see if Rashi says anymore. No. Yeah, so it seems like they're seeing. Interesting. Chizkuni sometimes will go a little bit more deep. No, so nobody. That's a question, Alan, that even the commentators don't have an answer for, which is give us more details about this plague and how many people died. Let's see if Ibn Ezra gives us.
Graves of craving.
Yeah,
That's what Kibroth Hata'ava means.
that's
Hata'ava.
or the graves of desire, right? Even more.
Wow.
This is where we end the chapter, right? We open up with them desiring me'od, having great desire, great teva, and we end with the graves of desire. So a whole very interesting passage, right? Balancing desire and prophecy, balancing manna and the quail, and Moses in the middle of all of it. Next week we'll get to the story of more prophesying and Aaron and Miriam being told off by God when they claim to be as good at prophesying as Moses. And God says, well, don't you know that Moses is the humblest man in the whole world. Thank you, everyone.